Good afternoon, Bermuda, and welcome back for our final pre-election youth forum interview. We're here with the Western candidates. We have Juanette Crockwell, an independent candidate, Misha Fubler from the Progressive Labour Party, and Dwayne Robinson from the One Bermuda Alliance. This is our final forum of the day, and we have the pleasure of speaking to three powerhouses, and we're going to get right into it. Waj, over to you.
Thank you so much, Teray. So for our first question, comments like those made by One Bermuda Alliance candidate Linda Smith expressing concern and questioning if she would be welcomed in the Progressive Labor Party have sparked conversations about racial bias within Bermuda's political sphere. How do you believe race continues to shape political participation and representation in Bermuda? And what steps would you take to address racial bias and promote inclusivity within our political system? And I would like to frame this question first to Ms. Crockwell.
Okay. Whew, I was just about to write the question down. Can you repeat it for me just because it was a bit loaded?
Not a problem. So the question is addressing comments made by OBA candidate Linda Smith expressing her concern and questioning if the PLP would welcome her into the party, and it sparked conversations about racial bias within Bermuda's political sphere. How do you believe race continues to shape our political participation and representation in Bermuda?
Okay. Thank you so much for repeating the question. So, um, I'm running as an independent candidate, and a lot of that is because of these kinds of challenges that we see through our political parties. I do think that race still fuels a lot of our social challenges, and I do not think that the political party system is assisting with that. So, historically, we all know the history. And so we know that the Progressive Labor Party was formed in response to the lack of equity in representation for Black Bermudians, racial and economic and social representation. And then the United Bermuda Party was formed as a result. And so here we are, all these years later, dealing with the legacy that has to do with the root and the formation of these political parties and our two-party system. And so that is a big reason why I think that it's time for us to get rid of it, because it is charged with all of that history, all of that tension, and we haven't found a way to actually disconnect from the racial biases that existed when the parties were actually formed. And so for me, that's a big reason why I think that independent candidates would be amazing for Bermuda and for this particular issue of diversity in Parliament.
Thank you so much, Ms. Crockwell. Now, Misha, I'd like to pull you in as a PLP candidate. What was your reaction to the comments made by the OBA candidate as somebody who runs in the PLP? And do you believe that there is still a lot of racial bias going on within the political sphere?
So I definitely had a good chuckle listening to that. Her comments are not unique when you think about people from her demographic around feeling more comfortable. As an active member of the Progressive Labor Party, I can disagree. There are members and candidates in this race who are not Black, even though the PLP is kind of traditionally seen that way. It'd be disingenuous to try and claim that there aren't supporters who don't still kind of align with that worldview, but I definitely don't think it forms the basis of my approach to canvassing. On the doorstep, I had a young person the other day who was very upset around how the PLP always focuses on race. And so I kind of opened with, well, I made no mention of that in my kind of arguments for why you should vote for me or why the policies will benefit you that we propose to implement. It is important to keep in mind that there's the intersectionality of class and race. And so, as much as one may feel that we should move beyond it, I think it is important to understand and acknowledge the context and how it has an effect on our class consciousness and the socioeconomic kind of disparity that we still continue to experience.
Before we get to Dwayne, I have a quick follow-up on that, Misha. Asher Simons wrote an op-ed that talked about the state of democracy in Bermuda, and she directly mentioned the Progressive Labour Party as kind of lavishing themselves at the expense of the country. And she talked about them as a political elite class, and they said that they use class to kind of insulate themselves, but also still signal racial racial cues. Did you read the article, and can you respond to that? Because I know that that's shared, particularly among young people, where it's like the PLP talks about race, but race that is not reflective of the racial dynamics in 2025.
So I did read the article when it was published. Definitely was challenging, right? As a member of the PLP, I very much appreciated it. I support people being public in their displeasure and trying to push the party in the direction they'd like to see, and that's kind of my motivation for joining as well. But to the question specifically, yeah, I can't deny that, right? You look at the messaging, you see the mailers that go out from the organization. It's something I continue to advocate for internally around how at least my ideology is grounded in class, which crosses races, keeping in mind that there is definitely correlation or causation, if you will, around the connection between race and the economic class that you're in. And yeah, I think that's, but it's not front of mind. I'd have to reread it again to provide more of a critique, to be honest.
Ash, back to you.
Yes, I would like to open the floor to Dwayne, especially as an OBA candidate and as a Black man. How did those comments regarding your fellow candidate of the OBA, how did you react to that? How did you feel about that? And can you also offer some clarification?
Well, I think that there's no denying that race plays a factor in our politics today. Lots of it due to assumptions, lots of it due to history. And I mean, there is no denying the historical inequality and the inequality that exists today. As far as earning, I mean, it came on in statistics that, Black males in particular are some of the lowest, if not the lowest earning in Bermuda. So it's no way to deny it or to speak as though it's not true or doesn't exist. What I will say is that the difference between the reality on the doorstep and the rhetoric is sometimes blurred, right? Because I would knock on a door with someone who, if you assume, would be strong OBA, who looks at me and says, I voted PLP in the last election. It's really not as prevalent on the doorstep when you're canvassing as it is when you have a kind of point and shoot system, which is utilized to monopolize as many votes as possible. What I will say though is that I don't believe that Linda Smith's comments were to say that she feels as though she wouldn't be embraced in the Progressive Labor Party. I feel like ideology-wise, she feels like, she wouldn't align with the Progressive Labor Party, who, as we've seen in their election campaign, are content to utilize things from historical context to drum up that emotional response in hopes to drum up more votes. So we do have a clear disparity that we have to address as a collective between all of us, all political entities, because it is a reality for all of our constituents, whether we're in a party or not. But I definitely think that the issue is in the rhetoric spewed by politicians of a certain generation, I would say, that I feel at this day and age doesn't align with the newer generation that is coming up, who have been kind of intermingled and intertwined within one another. But you cannot deny the disparity.
Great, thank you for that. Juane, before we move on to the next question, which is for you, do you have any responses or reactions to the discourse around the PLP's use of race to insulate themselves, and also the comments from the One Bermuda Alliance candidate, Linda Smith's and Dwayne's clarification?
I really enjoyed listening to both responses, and the way I feel about it is that because historically there was a specific racial base for both political parties in different ways continue to cater to that. If you remove that racial bias and racial tensions, you'll find that a lot of the support might dissipate. There are so many people who, because of race, vote a certain way, and we can't keep acting like that's not true. We've evolved as a community, but as long as we have these two parties that represent those very clear differences from their origin, I do think that people are going to continue to vote that way.
Thank you for your comments. Moving on to our next topic, Out Bermuda's policy manifesto calls on the government to, quote, enact hate crime and speech laws, restore same sex marriage rights, and establish gender affirming care for transgender people, among others. If elected, would you help support these bold policy reforms? Winnie, you first.
So, absolutely. I am a human rights advocate. And there have been times in my advocacy journey where I've had to really reflect on myself and my biases and kind of look at things from a human rights perspective. So, I can advocate for women, I can advocate for Black people, I can advocate for white people, I can advocate for LGBTQ people, because we're all people and we all deserve the same basic human rights and to exist in a society where we feel comfortable and supported. And so I'm very open about supporting any policy or legislative changes that will create that for all people.
Thanks for that. Misha, what are your thoughts? And do you need a refresher on the question?
Sure, no, around Bermuda's platform,
Mhm.
I reached out to the leadership off the basis of their invitation. We're still yet to meet, unfortunately. I think our schedules didn't quite align. But I've been an advocate internally. I also volunteer my time and talent to help normalize the acceptance in the community. Wanae and I are both members of Social Justice Bermuda, so you've seen the type of work and advocacy that we do. Um, the specific items highlighted, yeah, I would support. And I wanted to kind of call out how normalization of the statutory age limit laws, that normalization was one of the items requested in the demanded in the policy manifesto, and that's something that's made it into the platform. There's not explicit language around anti-bullying and harassment in the context of LGBTQ plus people, and maybe there needs to be stronger emphasis on that, but the platform does speak to enhancing those types of protections for everybody.
Thank you for that. And last but not least, Dwayne.
Absolutely. I mean, I draw a clear line straight across the board for the rights and inclusion of all, uh, regardless of their race, sexual orientation, or anything background upbringing. So absolutely, I would support that, and I think that it is incumbent on us. I know as folks who are looking to be elected that we have to weigh the majority rules sort of situation that we're in, which is a democracy, but also make sure that we're not trampling or marginalizing people further. And we have to avoid the disenfranchisement of smaller groups within our system that may not be necessarily heard or represented when it comes to the breakdowns of constituency votes. But at the end of the day, it is the responsibility of any government, any official, anyone who seeks to hold office to make sure that not only are you looking after the needs of the many, but you're making sure that those who may not have as amplified of a voice are still heard and also looked after and made to feel equal in their society. They pay the same taxes, they pay the same deductions on everything that we do, and I feel as though it's only fair that we support, their rights going forward.
Thank you so much, Dwayne. So we just want to switch gears just a little bit and move on to our next question. And there's been a lot of discussion within the public for quite a while on this. So given the growing concerns about public safety and rehabilitation of offenders, do you believe Bermuda's current legislation on sex offenders is sufficient? And what specific reforms, if any, would you advocate for to better protect victims, ensure justice, and promote rehabilitation? And I would like to pose this question first to Misha.
Thanks. I'm just paging through the platform here to get the specific wording we have around legislative reform. My experience with this is mostly kind of through what's put out in the media. We do have some members of the group who are more experienced in the legalities. But on the face value, it seems like there's a gap there, specifically around the rehabilitation component that you mentioned. There's a gentleman there who seems to have a significantly high rate of recidivism. He's back, he's out, and he's back in again for the same thing. And so clearly, the current program is not rehabilitating him sufficiently. I'm not familiar with the specifics of the sex offenders register. If we have one, I think we do, and maybe we need to kind of modernize that so it's something more accessible for folks, because clearly I'm not 100% on even its existence.
Thank you so much, Misha. Ms. Crockwell, I'd like to bring you into the conversation. If you can offer any context on the register, if you do know any information on hand, and regarding rehabilitation, what do you think needs to be done to fix these reforms and to best advocate for victims?
Sure. So to Misha's question, yes, there is a sex offenders list, and it is updated regularly. And you'll also note that when sex offenders are being reintegrated into society, there is a notice that is published. But I agree with him on the rehabilitation aspect. And so from a legislative perspective, one thing that I'm really big on, and as we move into this election, I before we go changing legislation arbitrarily, I want to make sure that we're looking at the policies that support this legislation, because oftentimes it's in the execution and delivery where we see challenges. And so specifically when it comes to sex offenders, there is no rehabilitation program for them. And, you know, I'm smiling a little bit because I did an assignment for my master's degree specifically on rehabilitation programs for sex offenders here in Bermuda. And I had, well, I don't know if I should say it's the pleasure, but I had the opportunity to interview sex offenders who had been reintegrated into society. And they told me very openly that there actually is no program. There was one offender who is one of those offenders who are in and out of Westgate. And he said, you know, part of his sentence included sex offender rehabilitation, and he didn't get it. And he almost wasn't able to be released because he hadn't fulfilled the requirements for release. And so that is a systemic issue. And when we think about criminal justice, when we think about social justice, when we think about restorative justice, all of these things sound really nice. We're going to do this, we're going to do that, but it's the execution of it. And so I think the public will know that when it comes to mental health support for inmates, regardless of the crime, that is lacking. And we certainly don't have the specialized support here on island to provide that rehabilitation. And in many instances, rehabilitation may not be even possible because of other mental health challenges associated with that behavior. And so that's a whole big thing that is going to require huge reform. But as it stands right now, you know, it absolutely is not acceptable. And that would be something that I would want to address through legislation and policy.
Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Crockle. I do want to open the floor to Dwayne to also answer. I do believe that this is actually within the OBA's platform. Can you speak to specifically how the OBA plans to strengthen this sex offender legislation and how this will best advocate for victims moving forward?
Well, first of all, I'd like to agree with everything Ms. Crockle said. And just to speak to, just before we get to the legislation, there's a big part of that I think a lot of us have noticed a trend of, which is, you know, we pass legislation and we have watched it a lot with the current government. You know, you pass legislation, but the implementation of that is flawed because you don't have the staff, you don't have the programs available. And it's one thing to say, well, let's change it. But I think the first and foremost, we need to start there. We've had a lot of uproar from the correctional facilities saying how the facility is not up to par, the staffing issues that they are having, also the fact that these mandated programs are not available. My colleague Robert King raised it in the House. I raised it in the Senate during the budget debate, that we were allocating funds, we're talking about policy, we're using a lot of buzzwords, but at the end of the day, it comes down to having the people there to actually implement that policy, to implement that reform, and to implement that rehabilitation. And then also to have the people in the community, as in our police, to be able to properly monitor that, to get back to community policing. Both of those pieces are understaffed and have had their budgets reduced, except for in the lead up to an election, of course. So we don't actually mention directly the reforms to the sex offenders registry and that legislation. However, what I will say is that we are looking to get back to the basics of functioning with our current legislation before we start to amend it. And right now, the legislation that we have in place is not able to properly operate. So we want to start there and then work on adding additional things. Because right now, all we're doing is spending money, and there's unfunded positions that are in there that are not being filled. So I think we start there and then work our way up.
Thank you, Dwayne. I want to give Misha an opportunity to respond.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious how we reconcile the two around highlighting the expenditure, but then not filling the roles, right? Like to have people in those roles, you need to pay them adequately and outside of salary, because that's only one component of motivation in the role. How do we get them there? We can't force them to be police officers or prison officers. We need to have a fundamental shift in how the leadership approaches the management, right? Management of people, maximizing output, building strong teams. You need to have a culture in the organization that is enticing for people to join. And I think I was a little disingenuous around the only in the lead up to election time, because you've seen over the last couple of years how there've been multiple rounds of calls for recruitment. And so I think part of it is at a national level, shifting the culture around kind of the stigma of being a police officer or working in that kind of national security ministry roles.
Am I allowed to say something?
Yeah, you could jump in, definitely.
I just wanted to say, so specifically as it relates to corrections officers, and it just so happens that I did a lot of studying on this at the master's level. So another exercise that I did was interviewing corrections officers, and I think that some of the hesitation for people to fill those roles is because of the challenges that corrections officers are actually facing, and they have vocalized it, and it's been made public, and there hasn't been any public update on those issues being resolved. But yet there's a call for more corrections officers, right? Because we need more corrections officers. And so to Misha's point, there is this disconnect, right, with the management of, at the very least, Westgate Correctional Facility. And so we kind of have to look at that. Like, why would somebody want to work there when the physical plant is underfunded, they're understaffed, there is no actual real quality rehabilitative programs? And so, I just wanted to add that context.
Thanks for that. We're going to move on to the next topic, which is about gender. Gen Z is seeing a historic reverse gender gap, whereby Gen Z women are outperforming Gen Z men on every measure of political involvement. Yet, spaces like the manosphere with various figures have gained a serious following as the backlash to feminism continues. What do you think about this movement? We're going to start with Misha first.
It's bizarre and worrying. My nephew's 16 now, and he definitely had a stint of being into the guy with the tight suits.
Andrew Tate.
Correct, that one. And so I don't like. It's so outside my kind of consciousness that I struggle to connect on why. But I guess at a root cause level, it's that lack of community and connection and kind of uncertainty in the future. They're looking for something, and the rhetoric that those types of people use is very appealing. And to the stats that you're saying, if they're feeling disenfranchised, we need to find ways to resolve that. Some of the candidates have reached out to me privately around these kinds of men rights activists, thinking that I would join the cause, and it's just ridiculous. I'm very much an advocate for equality, and the where does that start? Is it in the education, right? Like, why are we seeing that disparity between women's performance academically and professionally, and men's? Maybe it's tied to traditional gender roles and the ways that trades are changing as we globalize labor. The people that are filling trade roles tend to earn less, and so now they are in the stats earning less. Maybe I don't know. There's a lot there, but I do know that I would continue to advocate against the encroachment of that by kind of providing myself as a role model, by pointing people in the direction of mentors who can help to demonstrate kind of healthy masculinity, for lack of a better word. And I think we need to see more of that in these leadership roles. I often have to reach out privately to some of my colleagues even to say, hey, that's not cool, like maybe try something different instead in how you were communicating publicly, because that you set the trend, whether people are following you closely or not.
Thank you for that. Dwayne, over to you. And then one, I'm going to come to you after.
Yeah, I totally see it cropping up. I'm not quite Gen Z, but I do see it cropping in, and I believe that really it boils down to a bit of isolation. And I really feel like in a changing world where men were often defined by their strength, the things they could do, what they could contribute in that more quote unquote masculine way. And the world is kind of coming to a point where that those sort of skills are still in demand. Obviously, trades are still in demand, but the way that masculinity is viewed has changed, and I think that a lot of folks are utilizing that to encroach on the minds of young men who may be looking for their place in society, who may be looking for mentorship. I think that a lot of that has kind of done away with, where you were brought along by an older male figure in your life to kind of teach you about respect, how to control your anger, how to interact with other men, and how to interact with women as well, in a respectful manner. And I do believe that in society right now, that link where older men are taking younger men under their wing is somewhat dissipated. Not to speak generally, but obviously you do have a lot of active fathers, active male roles, but I do believe in a societal sense, this is something that we're witnessing. And with that void, it's being filled by a movement that is telling you, you need to reclaim your place, or maybe you're being forced out of your place. And I think that we have to combat that by doing our best, as Misha said, and I'll agree, to be a role model for those men, to say, hey, you can have a place in society. You can be viewed as a man. Your masculinity is not in question. You probably should know how to change a tire, maybe, but it isn't the definition of your manhood. It's not a definition of your masculinity. And I think that unfortunately, a lot of stuff regarding men has been attributed to physical ability to, do physical attributes. And I think that we need to now move to a point where it's unity and cohesion between the genders, because it's a huge gap. I mean, you've seen it in almost every country. They're voting different. Their ideologies are different. Between genders in their own country and within their own race, it's a huge difference. So, we have to find a way to bridge that gap. And I think, masculinity needs to be, appreciated in what it can bring, but also it needs to remember that femininity and the woman play a massive and equal role in our society. And their success should not frighten us. Their success should not make us feel as though our worth or place in society is diminished. So I think that if we can find a way to bridge that gap and make everybody feel as though they can still achieve. And I mean, even in Bermuda, like I said, we do have the black male as the lowest earner. So these are things that we need to address as well.
Thank you. 1A, over to you.
Okay, so I am happy to be on a panel with men who, support women and our value in the community. I do feel that feminism has always been attacked because it's seen as a threat, right? And every generation kind of finds a new way to attack that, and that's just because of the legacy of the patriarchy, or should I even say the legacy? Are we still living and existing within the patriarchy? That might be a conversation for another day. So I really see this as another continuation of what we've always done, right? And the idea, as the concept and the idea of gender is evolving, I'm actually interested to see where this is going to go and what's going to happen when we evolve into a society where gender is no longer such a defining aspect of our individuality. what will be the next thing, you know? So I just look at it, and this might be oversimplifying it, but I just look at it as, you know, an extension of what has always happened when it comes to how women are viewed and how the elevation of women is viewed. So many times in my campaign journey, just over the last month, I've been asked, because of my role at the Women's Resource Center, you know, about what about the men and all of that. And so there's just this, we're always, I think the world is designed to make us use our differences and see our differences in a negative way. And I think the real revolution is attacking that idea, right? And so over time, I do hope that we'll get to a place where feminism and gender equity is not viewed as a threat anymore, because right now that's just what I see. Each generation views it as a threat, and so there's a new reason why we're upset, you know.
Yeah, I will say like all three of your answers in them, there are elements that are very refreshing after previous conversations. So thank you all. Ash, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much. So just shifting gears to onto our next question. Many young Bermudians feel that existing employment initiatives and programs fall short of addressing the realities they face in today's job market. How would you respond to critics who say that current policies lack innovation or urgency, and sets your approach apart from others on this panel? So I want to give this to Dwayne first.
Okay, thank you. I do believe that policy, as it goes, obviously as primarily opposition member for most of my political career, you know, I've spent a lot of time kind of trying to put pressure on government policy and different things that we feel could improve these issues. But on this particular one, I do believe that it comes down to workplace culture in Bermuda. And I do believe that it's only so far that policy can go. I think we have a culture here in Bermuda where younger workers are held to a bit of a stigma in a sense of being lazy or not contributing or whatnot. And I do believe that Bermuda has always kind of been a culture of, you know, wait your turn, watch your mouth, you know, respect your elders, which I think is great on one end of it, because obviously respect for your elders is paramount in any function in society. But I think there also needs to be space made for innovation and new blood. And I think one thing that you will hear a lot of young people say is that, you know, it's not a lot of forward planning for their progression, right? I mean, they come into an entry level job, and a lot of times it's kind of like, where is my next step, right? And I think that the difference in generations, when you talk to an older Bermudian who says, you know, I worked here all my life, and you know, the opportunity came to me basically after I put a lot of years in. Whereas, you know, younger workers are kind of like, right, 2-3 months in, they're looking for you know what their next step or what their next progression. They need to be engaged, and that's why you see a lot of young people not sticking around at a job. They'll do a job 3 years, 2 years, and move on to something that's more stimulating or more attuned to their upward mobility. So I do believe that we need to update and modernize the work culture here in Bermuda if we want to attract younger workers in the future, because we can't simply expect a worker to work in one job for 10 years and be satisfied. Those days are gone. These younger folks, they're looking for new experiences, new credentials, new everything. So you have to find a way to stimulate them, and you have to find a way to give them an opportunity to move, even if it's a lateral move.
Most definitely. Thank you so much, Dwayne. Misha, how do you respond to critiques who say that current policies lack innovation or urgency, and what sets your approach apart from the others?
Sure. So in the urgency front, I hear you, right? Government is not a speedboat, it's a cruise ship. So when you set policy, it does take time to filter through to the public service who are implementing it. My approach, I think one of the things that will help differentiate or accelerate it or make it more effective is kind of data driven decision making. I've been advocating internally for the establishment of publicly posted kind of employment stats and projections. There's a thing that the US does called the Occupational Outlook Handbook. And within that, it lists all of the jobs that exist in America, like the types of them based off of, I think, tax returns. And it gives you the current number of people employed in it, what the kind of average requirements to fill that role are, what salary averages are, as well as a projection over 10 years. And I think I did get some buy-in as far for most of those components, not necessarily the projection. There's some apprehension because it's kind of difficult to project what's going to happen with such a small economy relative to neighboring jurisdictions over the next 5 to 10 years. But I think that would help to feed into pragmatic decision making from people who are preparing to enter the workforce. You may have a job that is your passion, and then through doing the research to see where the need is in Bermuda, you might have to adjust that. Like for myself, if I worked in the role I was most passionate about, I'd probably be an airplane pilot or a DJ. But when I was going to university, I said, well, what are the types of roles do we need in Bermuda, and what is going to earn me the kind of salary that I'm looking to have, and what do I not hate, right? Like I had a friend, he's kind of like, look, sometimes you're not going to love the job. You just need to make sure you're good at it and then you don't hate it. And so that's the pragmatic approach to finding the work. And Dwayne touched on some important points there around switching roles. That whole, like, I worked at this place for 20 years. You're doing yourself a disservice at that point. In my field in tech, 3 to 5 years at most if you're looking to maximize earning ability as an employee. And from the kind of fulfillment around having new jobs, I definitely left the place at 5 years because it's like, here comes in this problem that's a big fire that I can now just resend the email from 2 years ago where I solved it for you, but you were unwilling to implement. And so that part of the work fulfillment is important. Salary transparency as well, and not just in amounts, but total compensation package. One thing we get a lot on the doorstep, especially is like, oh, and I know the expat workers, they're getting housing allowance and tuition for school even, but a lot of that's anecdotal. And so to be able to really capture that in real numbers will help, as even if it's just from a negotiating standpoint. You as a local will be able to say, well, I know you're willing to pay up to X amount and provide these types of benefits. So now let's talk about how we adjust this opening offer. And as well, the succession planning, that's one of our biggest gaps in Bermuda, period. Someone's been in the role for decades and now they're getting ready to leave. And now we have to bring them back as a consultant because we haven't had effective succession planning over the years to prepare for replacement.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm so sorry to cut you off, Misha. I do want to bring Wande into the conversation. Just based on how the conversation has been driven thus far, if you want to add anything, but also if you have any critiques on how current policies lack innovation or urgency when it comes to existing employment initiatives and programming for young people.
Well, really, honestly, I don't have much to add. I really enjoyed listening to both of you. And as you know, I love that we're all I'm assuming we're all in the same age bracket, but we clearly all think alike, because as I was listening, I was thinking about the culture shift that needs to take place from, government as the largest employer through all the other sectors, because we're different than the baby boomers. We're very different. I think about my own professional journey. If I was doing what I went to school to do, I would be a school teacher, but I absolutely would not be a good one because I learned that is not that's not my strength. And so one thing that has been super important to me and that I see the next generation gravitating to is transferable skills. However, the way we recruit does not really take into account transferable skills, right? So we want somebody who has a bachelor's degree in whatever, and if it's not that, then we can't hire them. However, someone else who may not necessarily have a degree in that field has the transferable skills to really do the job well. And so it's a cultural shift that I think is needed across our country as a whole, because we see that culture shift in employment happening in other jurisdictions. And as we as we evolve, education and certifications, as I obviously believe that they're important, they're not as essential or it doesn't automatically mean that a person is going to be able to get a job in that field or do well in that area. And so it's a shift in how we approach employment and how we, what's the right word? How we push our young people. As a mother, I don't want to do what was done to me when thinking about my future. Like, I never had a question like, do you want to go to college? Do you want to do this? It was like, okay, you're going to college and this is what's going to happen and X, Y, Z. And so it's a whole different culture shift. And I think that leaders have to start to embrace that culture shift. So that's all I would add, but you guys already said it.
Thank you for that. We're switching gears now to electoral reform, which is top of mind for a lot of young people, particularly as they've been prevented from voting both in the 2020 and 2025 elections. Additionally, Media Maya had a segment about transparency for campaign donations. If you could address an electoral reform, what would it be? Misha, we're going to start with you.
Sure. I'm in the hot seat, right? The incumbent government. Kudos to yourself and the other people out there who were pushing for the absentee ballots. I encourage you to keep the pressure on once we establish who will be the government going forward, because it's something that needs to happen. Off the back of your advocacy, I did some research into kind of what's feasible and what exists currently when you look at kind of the US, Canada, UK, and the timelines. I'm open to being proven wrong, but I don't think we have the ability to implement it via mail. Many of the people I speak to on the doorstep who say that, they absentee ballot somewhere else, that by the time the ballot gets to them here in Bermuda, they have a day or two to respond, which then again presents its own barriers around whether you can afford next day courier to continue to participate. And so I think by leveraging technology, we can look to implement something that is done electronically to kind of bypass that hurdle. Because to be fair to the Bermuda Post Service, once it leaves Bermuda, it's very much outside of their control whether the ballot gets to you in time and then returns within the required timeline. And around campaign finance reform, it was in the platform in 2017. I wish it was in there for 2020. I very much feel that we should have greater insight into who is funding what. And so we have an idea of who to look at when it's time to see what types of policies and projects and things are implemented and who gets the contracts.
Juane, what about you? If you could implement electoral reforms, what would it be?
So totally agree. I think that whoever the next government is, one of the first things that they should do, more so as just a apology to Bermuda's young people, is implement the absentee voting. How that would be done, I would leave that to the experts. The technology side of things is not my forte, but I absolutely believe that needs to be a priority. When I think about electoral reform, I kind of think of some of the other things, like the number of members of parliament that we have. Those kinds of things come to mind. I for a long time felt that our democracy can be strengthened with less parliamentarians. And, I hate to say this as a candidate, but a higher salary for parliamentarians so that if they choose to, that can be their actual job, and they can spend their days ensuring that they're representing their constituents well. And so that would be one of the electoral reforms that I would really push for, is that, in Bermuda, we have 36 constituencies. I don't actually think that is effective. And, there's ways to make it a bit more effective for the candidate or should I say the member of parliament and the voters.
Yeah, thank you for that. I particularly appreciate the reduction of MPs. And I think it's only fair that it comes with the pay increase if you reduce the number of MPs. So no worries on that front. Dwayne, over to you.
Thank you. I also agree with the reduction of MPs. I think 2 per parish makes St. David's a parish, your 10th parish, and you get 20. So I think that would be something that I would like to see. All parties have pledged to do absentee voting. So I believe that due to your advocacy and others, and thank you for that, I believe that is going to be a reality regardless of who is in the hot seat after February 18th. But I also would like to see a bit of modernization of our current system. I think that we need more opposition-driven committees and collaborative committees within our Westminster to foster a bit of a collaboration between all the parties that are involved, if there should be more than two come February 18th. And I think that if it's one thing that this election has shown me, especially on the doorstep, is that people want collaboration. People want us to work together. It's easy for us to kind of throw stones at each other, but the Bermudian public has made it quite clear that they are not in for that. They're over it, the mudslinging, the finger pointing. So I really think that if we could modernize the system to have a bit more collaborative governance when it comes to the ruling party. Obviously, you know, the opposition has to say government, or opposition has to say government has a day. So we don't want to deadlock our government if they win the mandate of the people. But we also want to be able to showcase more ways for us to collaborate across party to show the Bermudian public that we've heard them and that we find that their want for that to be reflected in the government has been heard.
Yeah. Thank you all for
I
that.
missed the point on the finance reform. It actually is in the platform, as well as reviewing the number of parliamentarians. So that's something that we have committed to.
Yeah, would like to. Yeah, some action would be great if it was in there since 2017. Did you say?
2017 had campaign finance reform as one of the things. I don't know if the language is as explicit as it was in 2017, but they're looking to enhance transparency in campaign financing rules, and also through public consultation, looking at additional options for electoral reform.
Just really quick as well, on the finance part, the transparency. I do believe that I didn't answer it, so I don't want to look like I dodged it. But I do believe that a certain threshold, people should declare, doing this publicly over a certain threshold. I do believe if you're talking about $25, $10, $15, probably not, but a large amount, I think it should probably be publicly showcased.
And if I could just quickly say, because I didn't answer that either, probably because I'm an independent candidate and I don't have no campaign. But, I do agree in transparency, and I agree with Dwayne, over a certain threshold. But, I'm hoping for a day where we don't have political parties. So that's probably why my mind just wasn't even thinking of that one. But I would support it. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you all for those responses. They were great. Aj?
Well, I just wanted to highlight something that Dwayne had mentioned about St. David's being a potential parish, and I just got really excited about that.
This is Ajay's voting issue, by the way. She doesn't care about the economy. She doesn't care about education. She doesn't care about youth reform. She doesn't care about electoral reform. If you want to make that place a parish, you have a voter. Aj is your girl.
I love that. I watched your interview with the OVA candidate. I can't remember his name right now. I'm sorry. But I was like, she's asking a lot of questions about this.
Yeah, I was about to say she definitely should speak to Maurice Fairley for sure. That's him in our caucus every other day. 10th parish.
I'm a proud St. David's Islander. I will never let it go. But I would like to switch gears onto another topic, kind of circling back to our original question surrounding race. Young Black Bermudians in particular have expressed disappointment in the discourse around race. They exist in two different camps: disappointed that the OBA operates mainly in a post-racial way, and disappointed that the PLP is stuck in time and doesn't contend with the racial landscape of this age. We wanted to ask if you could respond to this observation and tell us what you would do to improve this discourse about race in Bermuda. And I want to give this question to Juane first, especially with you being an independent candidate and just from a bird's eye view on how both of these observations kind of work within the parties.
So I love that observation. Actually, as listening, I'm like, wow, that's pretty good, a good observation. And for me, this is actually deeply personal, because when I voted for the first time in, oh gosh, what year was it? I guess it was 2000.
You don't have to tell us, 1A girl. You don't have to tell us.
All right, I'm getting old, but 2007, I think it was. Yeah, but anywho, when I voted for the first time, I won't say how I voted, but I was very disappointed in the result because I felt like it was a racially driven result. And I wrote a letter to the editor because I've always just been that person who just thinks that people won't hear what I have to say. So I wrote a letter to the editor just expressing how I felt that my generation no longer resonated with that rhetoric. Not that race isn't an issue; it's absolutely an issue. But is it the issue that we should be voting? Like, is that what we should be carrying with us to the polls? And I was, really disappointed, and I still feel that way. And I agree with the critique, specifically of the Progressive Labor Party. I do feel, or at least as a voter, as a member of the public, it comes across to me as, let's keep beating this drum because it might be the only drum that we have to beat. Like, that's how it comes across, and I say that with total respect to you, Misha. And I just think that we deserve better, because as long as race is at the forefront of the political conversation, the other really important issues that might and oftentimes are impacted by race are not being addressed because we're still just talking about race. And so as a person who is committed to social development, we have to figure out a way to address these social issues. And I think that that conversation just keeps us stuck. You muted.
Sorry about that. Misha, I want to give you an opportunity to respond, especially as a candidate for the Progressive Labor Party.
Sure. So, in short, to those this is youth-centric, you need to engage more with the process. The folks leading the campaign are concerned about winning the campaign. And the people that engage with voting, race still resonates front of mind for them because it's still a primary barrier to their lived existence. And for me, we are the culmination of all of the history that has transpired. And I don't think we are at a place where race is no longer an issue. The whole like post-racial, I see no color thing is disingenuous. That's trying to ignore the problem. Like I said, I generally try to push my messaging around being class first because there's that intersectionality there. But look around Bermuda to claim that it's post-racial. I don't think that's true. When you look at senior leadership in the organizations across the island, we're 60+% Black. Is it 60+% Black in those organizations in the senior leadership? I don't think so. When you look at ownership of businesses, again, are we the majority in that space? No. And there are a multitude of reasons why that may be the case, but race is a significant one. And I feel like some of the messaging there is just that, well, it's too effective. We have no counter to that. And so let's try to say, well, that's the only thing they're focused on, which is in our defense, I don't think that is the case, right? It is definitely about being pro-labor, and we have support across the multitude of races, genders, ideologies that live in Bermuda if they support labor and working class people. And when you look at the policy that we do try to implement, that we put forward in the platforms, you see that it is often primarily focused on working class people who happen to be Black, but that's not the primary motivation. It's because they're so connected. And it doesn't inform my interaction with you on a social level, but it definitely informs my interaction with you on a macro level when I'm thinking about it economically and why you would have the opinions you do about politics.
Joanne, I want to bring you into the conversation, but also adding another nuance and context to it. So, how do you react to a lot of the discourse that we are having right now? But also, the OPA has been boasting a lot about the fact that your candidates are diverse. But how do you respond to an observation that your candidacy looks a bit tokenistic? How do you respond to that?
So, what I will say is that we as an organization are quite proud of the diversity in our candidates and in our membership. Each candidate goes through a candidate select process, and that selection process is the same across the board for all of us. And the makeup of candidates is based off of, whom has applied and whom is ruled by that committee to be the best fit for that constituency, and then confirmed and adopted by the branch and members in that constituency. So I think that regarding the OBA being, operating in a post-race environment, I think that it's more along the lines of us trying to showcase the type of Bermuda that we want to see, right? It's in our caucus, we gain consensus from labor, tradesmen, international business, doctors, lawyers, you name it, farmers. And, that is what informs our policy, is that room of diverse and different backgrounds of class, race, religion, creed, sexual orientation that allows us to fully represent Bermuda as its makeup is. But what I will say is that we also make sure to tackle and to speak on the current reality of Bermuda, and that is the fact that there are inequalities and disparities in earning, job opportunity, and upward mobility along racial lines. That's something that we see every day, and that's something that the One Bermuda Alliance is keen on addressing, most notably by empowering the local economy, where a lot of our particular Bermudians who are struggling the most exist in, entrepreneurs, you have lash tax, barbers, all of these folks. Entrepreneurship is in the blood of many young Bermudians now, each having their own sort of platform. I mean, you look at this one, you know what I mean? So we recognize that we need to empower people, and we need to uplift the local economy so that you can make a living there and not be shoehorned into one particular industry in order to survive in your own country. So I do believe that, we could do more to speak on race as it is now. I will accept that. But I will say that under Jarian Richardson's new leadership, I believe him and Ben Smith have been tackling that particular issue and speaking directly to the racial realities of Bermuda. And I think that the bringing in of Robert King, who has had so much background in, corrections and casework and things like that, can really speak to a lot of issues plaguing our society and social ills. So I think that we do have work to do in that space. But I believe we are committed to doing that work, and I think we've improved in that area.
Okay.
Thank you, Dwayne. Before we move on to audience questions and comments, I wanted to give an opportunity to either Misha or Juanita to respond to this topic if you have a comment.
I actually do just have a quick comment. I don't want to be misunderstood as believing that we live in a post-racial world, because we absolutely do not, especially as a Black woman, like I live that. However, I don't think it should be the cornerstone of any political campaign or any political party's support. I don't think race should drive that, because the government is going to have to represent everyone, right, across all races. And so, I look forward to the day where our political conversations are post-racial. Not that we're living in a post-racial society, but that we take more consideration into the fact that we're going to be representing all of Bermuda. And I don't ever want my support base, to be limited to a specific racial or even gender community. So that's just my extra little 2 cents.
Thank you, Juanita. Do you have any comments, Misha?
You always think after you listen to the other responses, I should add X or Y, but no, I think, like I said, my messaging, the thing I focus on, what I'm advocating for is class-based, working class people, and by rising tides lift all ships, just to, use a platitude or whatever. But that's the way forward. And we get to a place where race is a thing of the past by ensuring that we're empowering the people who are least advantaged in our society. And as it currently stands, we all know who that is, and that is why it's a part of the messaging. And again, for the young people who are turned off from that, I don't know, do your research in some ways. And to be fair, it's difficult to do that here because you can't just go on Amazon and buy a lot of the books. But do that and then be engaged with the process, because when you think about it, all of us are vying for your votes, and we're talking to you about the things you're saying are important. So tell us what's important, and we will respond.
Thank you. Well, we're actually going to go to closing remarks now, but I want to say thank you to each of you guys for what I thought was a great discussion. Dwayne, we're going to start with you, then we're going to go to Wane, and then Misha, you're going to close.
All right. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity and giving me the platform to be able to speak directly to the younger voters. And my closing remarks will be urging them to show up if they are here on the island and make their voices heard. I mean, we have never seen, in my opinion, such youth interaction and engagement as we've seen in this particular election cycle. And Bermuda Youth Connect and many other advocates and activists have done an excellent job, almost, Media Maya as well, bringing a lot of the information, bringing a lot of the candidacy and candidates to you in forums and spaces in which you can interact and or listen and get that information. So I want to say that, the One Bermuda Alliance is looking to build a Bermuda where we all stand on equal footing, where there are more job opportunities for you, not just in a particular field, but moving with the times of where folks are focusing their efforts. That we hope to have a collaborative and engaging government where people are able to speak with us and have referendums and all of that good stuff. So, hi. And, we're really looking forward to the future. And I know that sometimes that may seem like we're not looking at the present, but it's more so about us trying to emulate a government that is representative of the people, by the people, and looks like the people of Bermuda.
Thank you for that. Wane, over to you.
Okay, so I guess my closing statement is really, I'm excited. The youth of Bermuda excite me. And I believe that, and for those who may not know, this is more than just a 2025 election thing for me. This is systemic change. I want to see Bermuda's political system change. And I believe that, if my generation isn't successful in doing that, I have absolute confidence that the next generation is going to be able to do that, because just based on the questions that we've been asked today, I know that young people are engaged. They are thinking, and they are thinking differently, and that excites me. And so I would be, absolutely honored to be able to sit in the House as a representative for our future. I'm really just excited. I'm excited about what this election means for Bermuda, but specifically for the future for young people.
Thank you, Wane. That really means a lot. Misha, over to you.
Sure. Thanks for providing the platform to the young people of Bermuda. Please do engage in the process. Reach out to me. I'm on the socials. You see I'm active. I will say, unless you are the beneficiary of generational wealth, you are of the working class. I welcome you to join us as we continue to advocate for the people of Bermuda. If you are looking for a candidate kind of specifically to myself outside of the party who cares about the environment, who's forward thinking on changes in utility trends and can drive digital transformation in the government, which is something that will allow us to all kind of engage with the public service more effectively, I'm your guy. Also, social justice is something that's core to my motivation, and the alternative, it's just something that they are also looking to address based on the dialogue we had during the kind of one-on-one for C30 interview. I think across the slate of, there's 109 people running. I had somebody that's a little more experienced in this political process say that apparently this isn't the most. I think that in the 80s or something, there were even more, possibly a result of the 40 seats and the 2 seats per constituency, but I can't look it up right now because the parliamentary registrar looks to be upgrading their platform, so they only have the general election results. It used to go much further back, so check that out when that's done. But again, of that, I challenge you to find someone that has the kind of unique set of skills and experience that I could bring to the legislature and to drive strategic change by leveraging technology.
Thank you all. And we're excited to say that we have a bit of a treat for you because after this, since this is our last youth forum, we're bringing in a political activist, a human rights activist, Taj Donville-Outerbridge, just to react to the 3 different conversations we've had, Eastern candidates, Central candidates, and Western candidates. So I'm going to thank Dwayne, Wane, and Misha for an excellent conversation and welcome them to watch from backstage while we bring on Taj Donville-Outerbridge.
Thank you for all you're doing.
Okay. Bye, guys. And hello, Taj.
Hello, hello.
How are you?
I'm good, and I'm actually reassured, I think, after these conversations today.
React to them. React to the conversations. What are your thoughts?
I took some notes, and I think the first thing I have to say is that the quality of candidates and the knowledge that they bring has certainly increased from that of the by-election, I'll have to say. The candidates are well-versed. They seem to have a solid understanding of their role as legislators, and they all have a kind of excellent experience and kind of policy knowledge. So that's certainly reassuring, and it's vastly different from how it went in the by-election in October, I believe.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's to be expected just because there's so many candidates that are running. So people are like, well, you have to compete, there's much more competition. But I'm eager to hear about your thoughts on the Eastern interview and then the Central and then the Western. Take us through all of them.
What specifically?
What did you think about the discourse around climate change in the Eastern constituency?
I think it's always interesting to hear when people think that young people are kind of swayed by the media and that we don't do our research. I think that's a bit not disheartening, but there's a misrepresentation of the intellect and capabilities that young people have there. I think that was the main thing that stood out for me in that conversation. I think outside of that, I thought the conversation went well. Of course, I was disappointed that some of the candidates had not read Bermuda's policy manifesto. I think it's a bit absurd that you're running in an election as a candidate and you haven't read one of 2 policy manifestos that's been put out by civil society organizations, Bermuda's being one and Equal Justice Initiative being the other. I think it's disappointing to not have read it in full, to know what's in it. And then, I can go on later, but should I move on to the central one?
Please, we were going there.
I think the central one was interesting, and it definitely needed to be guided as a conversation. So Teray, you did an excellent job there. I think what the central one really reminded me of is how much work Bermuda has to do around culture. Like we still have a long way to go, and Wane briefly touched upon it here, but I think Bermuda lives in 1980 culturally, and that relates to gender, that relates to race, that relates to LGBTQ+, that relates to class, that relates to how we view the role of the government, that relates to so many things. And I think no party, to my knowledge, has really spoken to addressing those cultural deficits and cultural. And what's the opposite of evolution? Devolution? Not devolution, or stagnation. That's what I'll say. The cultural stagnation that Bermuda has had over the last 20 to 30 years. I think that is where a lot of our issues today stem from. And I would be interested to hear what the candidates that do get elected in the next government does do around cultural issues. Because we like a lot of Band-Aid fixes. But very rarely have we seen the work or the even understanding amongst the candidates of intersectionality and social justice and solidarity and what it takes to address social cultural issues that are the root cause of a lot of these issues. I mean, the PLP has tried with their gang violence thing, but centered around you have a pastor leading it. So once again, it's centered around religion, and that automatically alienates a certain portion of the population. So I think we have to look beyond religion to solve our cultural issues. That's what the central one brought up for me.
Ajay, what did the central one bring up for you?
Honestly, I feel like I haven't even had an opportunity to really settle my thoughts on it.
Yeah.
I think there was a lot that can be taken out of that one in particular, especially because I think in that one we really spent a lot of time on a lot of different topics. Um, Probably the thing that I took away probably the most was the way that um the absentee ballots was addressed and how
Mhm.
I feel like it was just a lot of excuses being said, like, like they're trying to put it off as a futuristic problem that they're going to look into instead of adequately addressing the problem at hand presently.
Mhm.
And I was really hoping that they were going to really answer my question to how there's a status quo among young advocates and young people in general to always be solution oriented around different issues that affect us when really it's on the onus of the leadership of the government to step on our behalf to do those things. And that's why I was trying to speak on like Bermuda Youth Connect and Bermuda's Love as an example of young people always constantly to come to the forefront and to supplement solutions on our own behalf. So that was one thing that I was really disappointed in particular,
Mhm.
especially because, to be fair, I think one of the biggest conversations during this election has been our young people and the disenfranchisement of this election being called. And I think that they should have been a lot more prepared to address that specifically. So
Yeah.
I was very upset and a little bit surprised as to how they had answered that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a huge shortcut, and then for the PLP candidate to turn it on We Youth Connect was mind blowing to me. Actually, like it's so disheartening as a young person to
Mhm.
hear and see how little our votes matter, right? And I think, like, yes, seniors are important and they're the ones who vote, but there's no effort put into making us want to vote. Why would I want to vote this election? That's what I keep asking people. What about, I mean, this political system? What about the current government? What about the opposition party makes me want to vote for them as a young person? And I can't find it. Like outside of having my own will to vote, like I
Mhm.
can't find any extrinsic motivators to encourage me to vote in Bermuda. I mean, it actually seems like the government has done everything in their power to exclude young people. I look at the ads that both parties have been running. I don't see a person under 30 in any of those ads. So who are they marketing to
Definitely.
in
Mhm.
their campaigning? They're not even saying that young people. They act like young people don't even exist in Bermuda. Like
Yeah.
18 to 30-year-olds are a big voting demographic, and they can swing elections. They swung the 2017 election. They swung the 1998 election. I mean, young people are the reason why we have seen government change in Bermuda. It's because of young
Mhm.
people, and I want people to understand that when young people vote,
Yeah.
that is when the government changes.
Yeah. And also, if you look at
Yeah.
history, like all of the people that we celebrate, they were not, this isn't an offense to anyone who's 50, 60, but they were not doing these things at older ages. Like they were quite clear from the very beginning of their lives that they're going to take a stand. And it's such a shame to see a kind of deviation from that. But I want to touch on the central panel because I too was quite shocked, but also triggered by that question of what was Bermuda Youth Connect standards to bringing students home and who was the donor and can they collaborate with the government? Because it showed me, I think in my reflections, I'll come to realize it as just their strategy because the PLP government should be, although it's a net good, they look insane right now because they called an election while students are abroad. And then this group of young people comes together and says, not on our watch, here's what we can do. So they look insane. So in that instance and from that perspective, it only makes sense to try and poke holes into something that is generally just a net positive. So I think in my reflections I'll come to that, but initially I was like, wait, Bermuda Youth Connect is not the solution to the problems that the government creates.
And what's been
Definitely.
most shocking to me is how they have some of them have celebrated it. Like I follow several PLP MPs on social media, and they're posting it. And I'm saying to myself, if this was your government that led to us not being able to vote, and you're celebrating the fact that a group of young people had to come together, find resources, and bring young people home to vote, go out of their way, do an extraordinary act that no young person should ever have to do to exercise the constitutionally given right to vote. And then you're celebrating it as if you had something to do with it, or as if it's not because of you.
Exactly.
Like, that is so baffling to me. When I see PLP candidates posting it, I'm like, wait a minute here. It's your fault. It's a direct result of your actions.
Yeah.
Unless you weren't aware that the election was going to be called, which then brings about even larger questions around cohesion within the party. So
yeah,
Right.
exactly. And then nobody asked them what they would do for electoral reform. That question, I think, took everyone for a loop. They were like, whoa, we don't know about that, as if that isn't dominating social discourse right now. And they could have said absentee ballots. I mean, I think, to the credit of one candidate, I think maybe they talked about it briefly, but it just seemed like such an easy opportunity to say, you know what, we got it wrong here. This is the electoral reform that I would implement or support. So I don't know what it is, but it is very disappointing.
I wanted to bring, because
Go ahead, Ajay.
I just thought that this audience question really ties into what we're talking about right now. I'm going to pull it up. So Mia Curran said in the last interview, this was in reference to the Central Forum. A candidate mentioned, do not trust politicians, and you have every right not to vote. What advice do you have for young voters during this uncertain and historic election? Honestly, I don't really have an idea of what's going to happen on this election. I really think it's going to be a very huge gamble. In the last election, yes, COVID was a factor as to why we had a low voter turnout, but I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of young people just don't show up and vote. I really won't be surprised, or even outside of the youth vote, just people in general. I think there are a lot of options, which is great, but I also think that a lot of people just really feel desensitized to the situation of what's going on within our election landscape right now. It's very I feel like I'm overstimulated with what's going on every single day.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a lot. And to your point, Aj, a lot of young people aren't going to vote because they're not here. I think in the central interview, somebody said, "Well, there's young people on island," and it's like, yeah, of course, but there's also young people abroad. So yeah, there was a lot of deflection. But I want to say something that I've been talking about with a couple of my friends is strategic voting, which basically means that a voter would sacrifice their true preference because the competition lies somewhere else. So, for example, if there are 3 candidates, 2 are running in the major parties, and then 1 is running on a smaller party, a strategic voter would sacrifice their genuine preference for the smaller party candidate because they know that the major competition lies between the 2 bigger parties. And I think that although that's just like a political science fact, this election is a bit different because there's momentum behind the smaller candidates, the independents. So I, like you, Ajay, am equally kind of like uncertain in my predictions because this is an unprecedented election in a lot of ways.
I mean, I have some predictions, but if I could just talk about, like, I mean, the electoral.
Not a book. You got a book, child.
I'm the election I covered, so I have to be prepared. On the reforms around the election, I was also disappointed about that. I think, like, to have no idea of any kind of solutions. I mean, I've written about it. Former politicians have written about it. Other community activists have written about it. I mean, we've talked about it here on numerous occasions. And for none of the candidates, except for a few, and except for around absentee ballots, to kind of have no idea around any kind of electoral reform that would be suitable for Bermuda, I think is a shame. Like, and for some people to say even that they're fine with the status quo, I think that was said in the central one from the PLP candidate. That was even more shocking. The status quo is not working. And everyone has made it clear that it's not working. Hence why we have 27 independents, 10 third-party candidates, and 1 Imperial Group candidate. So it clearly is not working for us. But my predictions, I I think the PLP is likely to win. I think they're gonna win between. Well, this is a big gap, but I have them winning between 19 and 25 seats. I have the OBA winning between 9 and 12 seats. I have the FDM winning 0 seats, although they have the potential of winning 2, but likely to win 0. And I have the independents winning at strongly likely to win 5, but could win up to 9. So that is my prediction. PLP likely to hold the government is highly likely. I think what would really cost the PLP this election is if the premier loses his seat. So that would be what I will be watching as a voter to see how the election is going to go. Is if this is a repeat of 2012, where Paula Cox lost her seat as the sitting premier, as she lost constituency 14, which Daimler's Ron Evans held as a seat for God knows how long. And so I think that will be the telltale. If Omar or the OBA candidate, Nikki Garrett, can pull it out, I know Nelisa Butterfield, who formerly held that seat for the PLP for 10 years or so, is canvassing on behalf of Omar and was at his announcement and supports him. So I think if that seat is lost by the PLP, then the PLP is likely to lose the election. And I think that will be the telltale sign of how the election will go.
Tosh, what are your reactions to Tosh's predictions?
Honestly, I'm just eating it all up. I really love what you do to like really go into these calculations, but I definitely do agree with you. I think, in my opinion, I don't know if I'm allowed to even say this, but I do think the likelihood of the PLP securing government is quite certain, but I do think that they will lose seats, which I think would be great because we need a more effective government, and the only way that we can have that is with more people within the opposition having a seat at the table.
Yeah, and also make no mistake, even though I think you guys are both right that the PLP is going to lose some seats, they have a lot of work to do in the future. Because although, like, yes, this is likely going to be a win, it's going to be a really tough job for them to brand themselves as a viable option for the future, particularly among young people who are going to be coming home in the next 4 to 5 years and have a very short memory of their disenfranchisement, but also their neglect. So I don't want to make it seem like they have a lot of work to do, and then like the following elections are going to be really tough for them because they could really get voted out.
I think this election is going to be a wake up call, and it should be a wake up call for both the PLP and the OBA. And I think the OBA may not even survive until the next election, the way things are going, depending on how many independents we in. And I think the PLP may soon run its course as well. So we'll see how things turn out. But what I wanted to say was that I think when I speak to older people in Bermuda, I am constantly telling them that they have to vote with us in mind, with me in mind, because they're not going to be around in 20 or 30 years, whether they like it or not. So I say you have to vote with us in mind, and if that doesn't change your vote, then something is wrong. Like you need to vote with Bermuda's young people in mind, 100%, and they often don't, and the PLP knows that, and that's why they canvass for seniors and don't speak about young people, because they don't want older people voting on behalf of young people. And if nothing changes this election around, I think a lot of young people are going to disengage even more so, because of hope, right? You lose. How long can you hold on to hope that something will change, that Bermudians, that the electorate, because we're placing our trust. Like, yes, we have votes, but we know we're not the majority. So we're placing our trust in the older generations to carry our message and vote with us in mind. And if they don't, a lot of young people are not coming back to Bermuda or are never going to vote, because what value does it have? What hope do you have if a government that has failed in the eyes of many and has such a significant majority and has ruled in a relatively authoritative way cannot lose the government after behaving in such an arrogant and reckless way? Then I don't know what will it take for them to lose the government. 30 years, like it took the UBP to lose the government? Can we afford to wait 30 years?
We cannot. You wanted to add something?
I mean, I definitely just wanted to tap into a lot what Tasha just talked about in terms of the way the older generation votes. And just a few weeks ago, I had sat through a very difficult conversation with my grandparents about the history of how they vote, which I understand and appreciate, but I just don't really understand the blindness of how they vote, where they don't even really look into the candidate. It's just they see a color and they just check a box. I really think that that's a very reckless way to vote, but I do appreciate that generationally we're starting to step away from that and step away from that status quo. So I do hold on to the at least the slightest hope that within the coming elections, as we get older and younger generations can start voting, that way of voting will soon start to diminish.
It's definitely going to crumble, because if these parties have formed their bases and their support around racial lines, and young people are saying yes, but not in this way, it's definitely gonna. It's not a viable option for either party. So, I mean, we're talking a lot about what the future looks like, but I mean, really and truly, we're talking about what our future looks like, because in the next couple of years, this is going to be our problem. Maybe not directly, because I'm sure, I don't know who has like intentions of running, but like I would never. But these are problems that we're going to have to inherit. So, I mean, we're talking about it as if, like we're sending messages to the older generation, but really and truly, this is our problem and is our problem now. But you guys give me hope, I will say. Like, when I look at the status quo, I'm like, I want to look away. But I think that there are specific young people who I have in mind, and I'm like, yes, they give me hope.
If I could, one thing I wanted to say was that what I did find interesting, and maybe it's just because of who the party sent. So, did you choose them, or did they send them?
No, the parties sent their candidates.
Okay. So it's very interesting of who the parties chose to speak to young people, right? I found that interesting. But what I do want to say is that there's a lot of similarities amongst these candidates, right? And I heard a lot of "as they said," or "I agree with what this person said." So it makes me wonder why there's so much division. And I wonder if and how these particular candidates, mostly on the younger end of the spectrum, kind of justify their similarities with the stark differences that the parties have embedded in them, like the racial divides that the PLP and OBA have embedded into their culture. And I wonder how these candidates kind of chose which party they're going to run for and why they didn't run independent. I always think about that. And maybe it was a matter of who heard them the most or who could offer them the most.
Right.
But like, what happens to principles and morals? That was what I was thinking. Like, does your principles align with and your morals align with not matter anymore? Or is it just about who hears your voice?
I think it's just about who hears your voice, because I've heard it from multiple candidates who said, I was interested in politics and I went to a meeting and somebody spoke to me and somebody didn't. So it was like, I think it's more of that, like where I felt heard. But of course, I think, I mean, not to discredit them, but perhaps there must have been more in that decision. I'm mostly curious about how the young candidates feel, particularly in the PLP, when they're like wearing a green shirt talking about PLP, but also knowing that the PLP is just disenfranchised young people, not once but twice. That is what I think baffles me. And then to not have an apologetic tone, but to double down and say things are okay, we're fine with the status quo. That's a level of disillusionment and cognitive dissonance that I can't fathom. That shook me.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, well, one thing that I kind of want to tap into, and also this is kind of like outside the pre-election forum, but also incorporating all of our individual constituency interviews as well, is the difference between personal ideology and party ideology, and how for many people there's a divide with that. So if and it makes me question like my own ideology on how I plan to vote, because those are two things that I'm now going to have to take into consideration: is the candidate's personal ideology and also the platform that they're representing. But also there's sometimes with a few of these candidates, there's actually a stark contradiction between the two.
Yes, let's
and that's
talk about
something
it.
important to know.
Let's talk about the ideological inconsistencies. But like I've heard a couple of candidates say, well, yes, I'm advocating to the party, which I think is fine. But it's just so curious to me that there seemed to be so much ideological consistency, but also a lack of ideology. Like I was talking to somebody internationally, and they were like, which one is the socially conservative and which one is the liberal? And I said, well, I don't know. I really cannot distinguish between them because Bermuda existed. It's a very conservative country. And to me, there's no clear distinction. I mean, there are some deviations, but there's no clear distinction.
I mean, policy-wise, they're both probably center. Policy-wise, they're both probably center parties. The OBA is kind of more, I suppose, fiscally conservative than the PLP is. But then, the problem with these lot, right, is that they don't know what the party's ideology is. Like, I bet you there's candidates within the PLP that do not even know that the PLP's ultimate mission is sovereignty for Bermuda, right? It's in the Constitution. There are candidates within the PLP who don't even agree with that. So then I have to question, why are you running for a party that constitutionally is supposed to be advocating the end goal of the PLP is Bermuda to be an independent jurisdiction, right? And social justice, and to achieve social justice through that independence. That is the main aim of the PLP, and has always been since its foundation. So I don't understand why there are candidates in there who do not support independence, right? And this election, they haven't even talked about it because they know it's a hot button. They know it's an issue that is very controversial and could lose them votes. So I remember I was at this youth thing in London. I think Teray, you attended as well. The Premier attended, and he asked us what our views around sovereignty, and that we would see something around sovereignty in the PLP's next platform. Now, this was after 2020. This was around 2022 or so, and so I guess I don't know what happened to that agenda item, but it seems to have vanished from the discussion. And it is an important issue, especially as we seek to join CARICOM and young people become even more aware of the effects of colonialization and how that impacts our everyday living. And it's been completely ignored and not addressed this election cycle, even though, I'll reiterate, that is the primary aim of the PLP. And I don't know what the OBA's mission is. I don't know if they even know what the mission is, because they're all so different. And we don't operate as if political parties in Bermuda. And that's what's so interesting about Bermuda from a political science point of view, is that our parties are not aligned on social, on ideological principles. They're not. Like, they just really are not. I guess the only party that is the FDM, and we all know about that. But the PLP and OBA, I think they may have had a vision, they may have had a mission, but they strayed so far from it. And the leadership has led them so far away from what their intention and their core principles were meant to be. So, yeah.
No, definitely 100%. And I've even, because recollection wise, I would say that I have been more in tune with the 2017 and 2020 election, and even the difference in terms of the cultural mindset of each of the parties has drastically shifted between each of these different elections. It's almost like a lapse of time in between each of these, which in actuality has only been 4 to 5 years.
What do you mean? Say more about that. Like, what do you think the differences are?
I don't know. I guess it's a mixture of the things that they were focusing on within their platforms at the time. Some of the things weren't even addressed or followed through on, and then new things get added. It's hard to follow, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. I don't know if they're responding to current discourse or problems. I mean, Taj had mentioned earlier that the PLP hasn't pressed the button of sovereignty because the current climate right now wouldn't allow for that. People are like, I can't even drive my car without dipping into a pothole, and you're talking about sovereignty. This seems so detached from it.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess I want to ask you, because I know that we were both on the campaign trail in 2020. What do you think the difference is between the 2020 snap election and this general election?
I think it's also the focus of why the election is happening. I think during the 2020 election, there was more so a lot of a lack of security, a lack of there was just a lot of looming uncertainty within us as a culture, especially with COVID happening. So the focus of that was just vote for a secured leadership, which is hence why the snap election had happened, was to secure leadership for the next few years. I think now now that we are in a place of security, and we've gone back to this new normal, now the conversation has drastically changed to how do we move forward today, you
Mm.
know?
So yeah, so people are like, do you think they're making more like informed choices?
I think so. I think a lot of people probably voted in the last election the way that they did because they didn't see any viable option at that time. And now we have so many other options at our disposal.
Yeah, we have a lot of options. Like there are a lot of four-man races, but I wonder if it's too many options. Like we saw in the by-election, the four-man race in C36, and that gave the incumbent, the PLP, the seat. And I'm wondering what voters are going to do now because they've seen this happen twice. And although the parties and the candidates didn't learn themselves, I wonder if the voters did. And I wonder if they're going to be a bit more strategic in their
Mhm.
votes.
Yeah. And I kind of do one thing. I want to tap into that by-election in C36 as an example is, for me, it was a bit disheartening, the results, because in my eyes it wasn't a win at all, because the um MP, Emily Gale, what's her name again? Emily
Mhm.
Gale.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
it.
She only won by about 130 votes, which it only represents only about 10 to 12% of that population, which means that between 85 to 90% of that constituency didn't even vote for her. So I don't even see that as a win, in my opinion. Yes, there was a low voter turnout for that constituency, but I don't really see that as a win because there wasn't really good representation of the electorate that came to support that election.
Yeah, and Ajay, I've heard a lot of people say that. So I know that your sentiments are widely shared because the vote was split. And I'm wondering, like, were you also disappointed that the candidates and the parties didn't learn from that lesson, and therefore now have all these four-man races? Or what are your thoughts on that front?
I mean, they also don't have control over the amount of people that choose to put themselves forward as independent candidates as well.
Mm.
Um, but one thing that I kind of want to shift the conversation is the looming conversation of like a coalition between the independents and the smaller government parties.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about because that is hot, and we have Taj back from the bathroom break. Welcome back.
Sorry, what did you just say? I missed it.
We were talking about the results of the C36 by-election and
Yes.
how that wasn't, at least in my opinion, that wasn't really a true win due to the PLP candidate only winning by about 13% of the electorate. And we were also talking about the oversaturation of candidates and how that plays
Mhm.
a role within this election, like the election results, and the potential of alliances or coalitions between the independents and the smaller governments. Like government, I'm saying the wrong things. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah,
Smaller
it's been a long
parties.
day. We get you, girl.
I think
Yeah.
yeah, I think it would be very interesting to see how it all shakes out. I mean, I think like who even knows? People may even leave the parties to become independents to form a independent government. We have no idea how it may shake out really in the end. But I mean, the likely, as we discussed, the likely result is the PLP will be the government, and the coalition, the independents and the OBA will form a coalition because I'm certain the independents will win at least one or two seats. And so they'll probably form a coalition, or maybe not a coalition, because they don't. Opposition parties don't necessarily have to form a coalition. So they may just stay as two independents, kind of like how Sean Crockwell and Mark Pettingale stayed as independents for the last year or 2 years of their terms.
Taj, feel free to say this is classified information, but which independents do you have as likely to win?
Oh, I mean, it's not classified information. I think the ones with the strongest chance are Renee Webb in C13 against the very unpopular Minister of Education. C19 with Susie Aruda. I think that is
Mm.
a likely swing seat. Marcus Jones is very unpopular and a very controversial Trump supporter, um, which many people don't know. But yes, he's a Trump,
Mhm.
a very proud Trumper. I think 1A stands a good chance. I think the fact that she is running against another independent may hurt her chances slightly, but if that other independent wasn't running, I think 1A would certainly win. And I think Cyree is likely to win as well. So there's the five I have. Oh, and Tiffany Painter, I think, stands a good chance also. So
And C2.
those are the five I have as strong, high chances, and then medium to low chances of winning, I think, is C28. So Galvin Kennedy running against Dennis Victoria, especially with his recent endorsement from Dr. Karika Weldon. I think Vic Bowles stands a good chance in C20. Kind of given Michael Fay's unpopularity and the controversy surrounding Vic Bowles, and has been a kind of very public face of the OBA for a while. And that is a seat that the PLP has no chance of winning. So it is between Vic Bowles and Michael Fay there. So we'll see. I think John Swan stands a medium to high chance of winning. I think his age presents a challenge for a lot of voters there. And I think Justin Matthias as well in C25 stands a medium chance, just given that he's been in that constituency longer than both of these candidates that are running. He ran as a candidate in that constituency for the first time in 2018. So he's been there for a while. And he kind of has that leverage, and his policies are solid. I think he's focused on a lot of local initiatives, which is very different from the others. So those are the ones I have likely there.
Yeah, and what is it like C2? Constituency 2 is a seat to watch because that seat put the OBA in government. I can't remember her phone. Is it Nandi? Is it Nandi Outerbridge?
Yeah, Nandi Outerbridge.
Nandi Outerbridge.
Nandi Outerbridge, one of the youngest MPs ever elected at the age of 24.
I thought she was 26.
26, maybe? I thought she was 24. Maybe 26.
Either way, she was the youngest. And that seat definitely put the OBA in government. So that's one to watch. You were saying something before, Taj?
No, I was just saying, what are your thoughts on those predictions?
I think I agree. I would co-sign that as well. I think the ones that you listed as very strong chances, I do agree that they have presented themselves in a very competent way.
Yes, exactly. And compassionate, a competent and compassionate way, I think.
Compassionate, yes.
Yes, which is very rare, apparently.
Yeah, I would say my comments are I was disappointed that 1A is running against another independent because I also had her down as a likely pickup, but I'm a little worried about that now because Karen Hodgkins again may split the vote, and this is why I was just disappointed that there seemed to be nobody learning lessons from these by-elections. There really isn't. There's no strategy. People are reacting to things and then putting themselves forward, which is admirable. But like, you also have to follow up with policy, with strategy. So,
and even what I will say is that, and I've said this to people around, that if the PLP wins a significant majority again, it is the OBA's fault. The OBA is unpopular. They have been a weak opposition. They have some very interesting candidates. And so by them running against very strong independent candidates, they've just taken votes away where they had no chance of winning. So like especially in the Pembroke area, like some of the independent candidates might have stood a chance, but with the OBA in the running, especially in some of the eastern areas too, like in C2, if Tiffany loses, it's because the OBA and FDM put a candidate there. Make no mistake.
Yeah, this sounds like what the Imperial Group is trying to push with this combined opposition.
Exactly. They should have thought about this strategically more, because if the goal was for the PLP to lose the government, that is out of sight now.
Wow. I do recall that the FDM had mentioned that they meticulously placed their candidates in places where they thought was in good representation. So, I mean, I guess it's interesting in itself.
It is interesting considering that they only had 10 candidates. So it's not like they had they had all these candidates that they needed to place. I think they could have been more strategic. And we spoke to both Tiffany Painter and Sherlock, and they sound like great people. But I was again disappointed that they're running in the same constituency because of what we've seen.
and there's 8 constituencies that only have PLP and OBA candidates. So that is where the FDM could have put some candidates, or an independent could have won. Like, for example, in my constituency number 4, it's a swing seat. The OBA has had it, the UVP has had it, and the PLP has had it. So it's a seat that could be won by a third party or an independent, but yet there's just an OBA and a PLP candidate running. So I don't think a lot of thought or on the ground knowledge, I would say, of the actual localities and the voter basis of the constituencies wasn't thought out that well, in my opinion. And that brings me to another point, if I can, that Dwayne mentioned just now, which is something if it's true, I admire about the OBA, that they chose the best candidates for their constituency. If that is true, which it looks like it could be true, if that happens to be true, then that's a good thing, because that's not something the PLP does, for sure. The PLP has a lot of candidates that don't even live in their constituency, as does the OBA. But the PLP, for a party that claims to be local, right? This is the thing about the PLP. They make the claim that they're a local party and that they're for the people and the grassroots, but yet most of the candidates do not live in the constituencies, right? And the PLP doesn't choose candidates based on who's best for that area or who would best represent that area. I would posture that they choose candidates based on loyalty. So if that's the key criteria, then I think the OBA has the moral high ground there.
And also a lot of the independents that we spoke to said that, like you said, they were not very strategic in their decision because they wanted to run where they live. So they said they want to run where they have boots on the ground, et cetera, et cetera. But something that you said earlier made me think about my situation, where there's both Misha and Dwayne in my constituency. But it also reminded me of how Dr. Karika Weldon had said that the incumbent in C28, MP Dennis Lister, should have ran in his constituency, and Misha should have been in C28 because apparently that's where he lives. This is all information from Twitter, so feel free to fact check. But that's what that made me think about. It could be loyalty, but I guess we never know. Ash, what are your thoughts?
Honestly, I can't wait until February 19th.
For it to be over, right? Correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, agreed. We have a comment from Long Tales and Short Stories at Taj. Why don't you run in this election?
This is a question that I've gotten a lot, and I'm sure you get it as well. And not even a question, but it's often a comment that I get, which is, you have all these things to say, all these ideas, and you don't want to run as a candidate. Well, let me posture this. If I run as a candidate, who's going to be there to hold the government accountable? Someone has to be on the outside to hold the people in power accountable.
Yep.
And for the time being, I'm happy to play that role. So that is why I'm not going to run as a candidate this time around, but maybe in the near future, who knows? But at the current moment, none of the parties represent my ideologies. And the independents, as strong as they may be, I want to see how it shakes out this time first. But I think the key part there is that someone has to hold the government accountable. There is work to do outside of just being an MP. That is not the end and all to being politically engaged. There is other work that has to go on, such as holding them accountable, such as listening to the House of Assembly every Friday, and catching those little comments to write articles on and bring awareness to the people. That is work that has to be done that will not be done by sitting MPs. So that is why, for this time around, I have not run in the election.
Ajay, what about you?
No, I wholeheartedly agree with everything that Taj just said, and that's something that I've been saying since the conception of Bermuda Youth Connect. In my opinion, prior to Bermuda Youth Connect's conception, there was nobody in this space doing what we do. And I really think after the 2020 election, that's why you see all of these young people coming to the forefront and advocating and doing what we do. You see the creation of Bermuda's Love, Future Leaders. Everything is post-COVID. That is not a coincidence. Everything happens for a reason. And it's because we need this type of advocacy work done in order to hold our government accountable. And I honestly think, due to the fact that we had a small opposition that couldn't really operate effectively, I think we had to, in a way, kind of take some of the weight off and assist them in a way.
Yep.
The
That reminds me of this
position.
tweet. There was a tweet from Kristen White right after the election when the POP won 30 seats, and they said, "Activist, we are needed now more than ever, 30-6 or whatever." And it's been very true, and I've been very proud of the work that all the young people are doing. But I also want to underscore that you don't have to be a candidate to make a difference. In fact, it will be very controversial and problematic if everyone who could say something about politics was a politician. That's not the purpose of Bermuda Youth Connect or of any youth activists. And I think the term like intelligentsia, like I've heard a gentleman say, like, you guys are the intelligentsia, you need to be in government. And I'm like, the intelligentsia is meant to represent people outside of formal networks. So the government is not an intelligentsia because they have an allegiance to a party, an ideology, the public. Intelligentsias are meant to be independent and separate thinkers. They can be the most objective. So I think it's very dangerous. And I get very frustrated when people are like, are you guys going to run for politics? It gets very frustrating because although that will be our decision to make, it's just so unfair that young people are meant to carry the cross. Do we have a question? I see you both looking at something.
Yeah.
We do
Jadea
have a
just
question.
sent a question.
Okay, let's see. Judea Spencer says, hey, just wanted to pick brains. What is the argument for a candidate to must or a candidate who has to live in their particular constituency, especially as Bermuda is small, where people have families and ties across the island?
I
I mean,
think
I think on a basic level, I think every constituency, every community has their own particular issues. So I think, you know, if somebody doesn't live in my constituency, they're not going to live the day to day of what I have to experience on a daily basis. So that kind of relatability is very keen on how they expedite certain issues, like address certain issues. That's just on a basic level for me.
I mean,
Taj?
yeah, I agree. I don't think that they must. That's not at all what I was saying. I was saying that if a party claims to be local and grassroots, then they ought to be in action. That was my point. And I think what I would turn my focus to, rather than if candidates must live in a particular constituency, I would turn my focus to the trend this election and the election prior in 2017, even where candidates were that didn't even live in Bermuda up until a year or a few months before the election are running in the election. That I think is more peculiar than candidates not living in the constituency. I mean, Curtis Dickerson famously returned to Bermuda to run in the election. You have some of the FDM candidates, including Quentin Sherlock, and well, who's running in C5? Desmond Crockle, who
I want to
haven't
say
lived in the
even
island.
Maurice Foley recently moved back to the island.
Exactly. And
Whoa.
Joan
Yeah.
Ball Burgess as well, running for the PLP. He's only been back on island for about a year and a bit. So, like, how can you know what Bermudians' issues are? How can you know what it has been like to live underneath the PLP government or in our political circumstances if you haven't lived it? And even
Yeah.
myself, I haven't lived in Bermuda for a few years now. So, like, even that for me is another reason why I wouldn't run in this election, because I don't know what it's like to be on the ground, right? And again, I think the other part is that some parties just place candidates anywhere, right? Like, especially in seats they know they have no chance of winning, like the PLP with C22 and C23. The OBA has done a better job this time with some of the people actually living and being from their areas. Like, I know Pembroke, which is PLP stronghold, has Sophia Tessitore running, and she lives in that constituency in C21. So for her, it was important to run in the area in which she lives. But I think it's disingenuous, actually. That's what it really is. It's disingenuous. And I think Gary Foster Skelton, he asked about it when one of the candidates was rolled out. I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was the Attorney General, Kim Wilkinson. When she was rolled out, I think there was a question around, like, or no, maybe it was Aisha when she was rolled out. There was a question around, like, how can the people of this constituency trust that this candidate will work for them if they've never even canvassed this area until the election season? They've never lived in that area. They've never canvassed it. They've never been elected to represent that area. They have no stake in that constituency. So what is their motivator to ensure that their constituency needs are represented to the House level if they don't live in that area? If they're not
Exactly.
personally affected by the issues that constituency faces.
I would
So,
say I would say these points become even more highlighted once you realize that we have 36 candidates who can take the House. Like that's a lot of people to be vying for seats. But if there were less, seats available, then perhaps there would be an argument for people not having to run in the constituency that they live in. But just pure math, the fact that you're competing for 36 seats, it's in your strategic advantage to run where you live. And I think that's something that the independents were underscoring.
There's another question, I think.
Let's see. From Long Tales and Short Stories. Actually, let's just go through the comments in generally. Okay, let's start up. Okay, so we have Toby Butterfield who says, great questions for sure. Toby Butterfield also says, Misha and Wane are great candidates and are free to be more real and are free to be more real about race that Dwayne can. He says, Toby Butterfield says, really appreciate you, Taj. Marie Marshall says, exactly, Ajay. Hi, Nichols. There's a deficit and a disconnect from the candidates' conversation on the youth and LGBTQ plus community, particularly. Toby Butterfield also said, I feel the path for progressive will always have to be the vote for the least worst option. Then post-election, they can apply pressure for their causes. Okay, let's see. We have some support for Sairi Bean. Fabulous conversation. I'm grateful. And then Long Tales and Short Stories says, do you think candidates need to be qualified based on experience and education before putting their hat in the ring? Curious.
My answer is very controversial. I think yes, in some capacities.
I think we have to have more criteria than what we have, right? Most countries have more
definitely
criteria
bigger than that.
than what we have. We have very basic criteria, which is literally like you have to have lived in Bermuda, you need to be registered to vote, and something else. Like it's so minimal, right? Whereas in other jurisdictions, there are much more stringent criteria. And like even around leader of our country, should our leader of our country have been born in Bermuda, or can it just be anyone who has Bermudian status? Because currently it can be anyone who has Bermudian status. And that is a fear a lot of people have, which is back the PLP with Michael Fay, right? Like Michael Fay can be the next premier. And how would people feel about that particularly? But around qualified based on experience and education, I don't think candidates should have to be, but I think ministers should have to be.
Right.
There's a requirement for the Attorney General to be a lawyer. There's a requirement for the Minister of Finance to have some kind of financial undergirding. But why does that same not apply for the most important factors of our country, which are education and health, right? Like how do you have people in education who've never worked in education, never studied education policy, know nothing about public education, didn't even attend public education, but yet lead the administrator for public education? That doesn't make any sense to me. How do you have a Ministry of Health that is not led by anyone who understands anything about health? And it's just regurgitating information from civil servants. Like there has to be a point in which we say we deserve better than that. And I think that's what we need electorates to say. Because even when I'm looking amongst the OBA candidates and the PLP candidates, I'm saying, who among you will be the minister of this and the minister of that? Because that's something people don't vote for, right? We don't think about that when we're voting. But I'm thinking about that when I'm voting. Who amongst you will be the Minister of Finance? Who amongst you will be the Minister of Education? Who amongst you will be the Attorney General? Who amongst you will be the Minister of Public Works? Who amongst you will be the Minister of Social Development? And do they have the prerequisite information to serve in those roles? No, they don't. So they rely on the civil service, and then they turn around and blame the civil service for their inaction. How does that work?
Somebody says, Cara Butterfield says, clock it. I love that phrase. Clock it. Clock it. But Ajay, you said your opinion was controversial, but I didn't hear you say anything controversial. So what were you saying?
No, I think it's controversial in the sense that some people may disagree that you don't need any type of experience or qualifications to run. But I guess I need to add a slight undertone to that. You need to have a certain level of competency to do it. Like, it takes a lot to understand policy, how to create legislation, how to read it, how the electoral process works. And I really, in my opinion, look at a few of the people who have put themselves forward, and I'm unsure if they can do any of those things.
100%. I mean, let's circle back to my article that I wrote after the by-election called Political Mediocrity Will Be Our Downfall, right? Like, if we continue to elect people who do not know what it means to be a legislator, then we will fail from the onset. This is not a job that you learn on the job. Like, it just cannot
No.
be.
Yeah.
It's too important to say, I don't know how policy works. I don't know how the House of Parliament works. I don't even know how many MPs there are. I don't know how the premier is chosen. These are things that I've heard from people who are running in this election. They don't know how the senators are chosen. They don't know how the premier is elected. They don't know how the opposition leaders elected. These are things that I have heard from candidates running in this election. Not independents, party candidates.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
So
how do we
attract
people who have these qualifications to politics? Because every person that I think would be great are saying, absolutely not. This is not for me. So I think we have to talk about the structure of incentivization when it comes to attracting talent into politics, because right now it's a hot mess. Why should a qualified person with a nice job on Wall Street want to come here? If they don't have a deep sense of pride or allegiance, they would not. So how do we get them here?
They need to be paid more. They need to be paid more than $56,000 a year. That's for sure. But there needs to be less of them in order to facilitate that, right? So a lot of people may find it controversial, even on that, I somewhat disagree, because yes, that will attract more people into it. But then we'll have people doing it for the money, which there are people there that they're now doing it for the money. So if you increase it, I think you'll have more people there doing it for the money. But let me tell you what I think. I think that MPs should be paid the median salary of their country, of Bermuda. So if they make the median salary, then they're incentivized to work to increase the median salary. And it's that simple. So that's what I think MPs should be paid. The median salary of, even if we could localize it even more, the median salary of the constituency, but we don't have that level. We don't have that level of data. But just the median salary of Bermuda, and then that will incentivize them to work harder to increase the median salary, because when the median salary of Bermuda increases, their salary increases. So that seems like a fair way to go about it. I think that, but that's a longer term kind of idea.
Yeah.
But increase in salary definitely, I think, is necessary, especially if another idea that I hear, which is that MPs should not be able to work other jobs, neither should ministers, but they currently are allowed to be ministers, part-time ministers. Most people don't even know that Bermudians can do that. I think there are some part-time ministers right now that have other jobs, and there are MPs that have full-time jobs outside of being an MP, which that's not what we want from our legislators. We want them to be our representative, and that to be their sole job. So we have to pay them a salary in which they can survive off of that, and it's actually equitable. But there also has to be a balance between that and what everyone else is making, because they serve the people, right? So they shouldn't be making absorbent amounts of money to serve.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a long day, and we're gonna wrap this up.
My ring light is like causing the biggest headache right now.
Yeah, no, it's been a long one. So final thoughts. I mean, the election is in how many days?
3?
3?
Yeah.
3 days until the next election. So any closing remarks, Taj, Ajay?
I mean, I'll say what I said already. If you don't know who to vote for, go to the polling station anyway. All the candidates will be there. Talk to them, challenge them. And if you still don't know who you're going to vote for when you go into the box, you have another option, which is to spoil your ballot. But don't not show up. Don't give yourself the opportunity to hear from the candidates at the polling station. Don't miss out on that opportunity. So I challenge all young people and all people in general to show up, regardless of if you have your mind made up or not.
Wait, Taj, actually, while I have you here, tell us about your experience going home to vote. Was Bermuda Youth Connect discriminatory in our efforts? Did we tell you who to vote for? Clarify for the record.
No, there was no telling of who to vote for. There was no discriminatory action. It was a first come, first serve situation. And that's as fair as it could have possibly been. And there were even children of MPs there for the PLP, which now I disagree with. But because it was a fair process on your behalf, they were allowed to come. But children of MPs whose government was the reason you had to do this should not have been able to be on that flight. But anyway, that's my 2 cents.
And you hear that? Equalities of fairness. even in the face of. I forgot about that. Glad for the clarification. Aj, any closing remarks?
I mean, I just want to echo what Taj said. I think that showing up to vote is your civic due diligence. And there are many options, and Media Maya went through all of the different ways that you can vote. Spoiling your ballot is one. Um, Honestly, just vote. I have no brain cells left. I'm sorry.
No, me too. I keep forgetting that I'm on camera, child. But yeah, no. Everything you guys said, I echo. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in. You know what's funny? We actually have more people watching when it's just us than we did with the candidates. No.
Of course.
Probably somebody sent it and it was like T.
No slight to the candidates. No slight at all. This is just what the
No,
data
but
is showing.
and then just to set the record straight, we really do, especially throughout this process, these last few weeks of us conducting these discussions and interviews, like I really am appreciative of all of the candidates that have taken time out of their schedule to come on our platform and share their insights and share their perspectives. It's been greatly appreciated.
And very illuminating. We have a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of good work being done. So with that, we will see you when we see you. Best of luck. Election day is February 18th. Polls are open at 8 a.m. and they close at 8 p.m.
8 p.m.
8 p.m. Yeah. So we'll see you then. Thank you for tuning in, Bermuda. Bye.